Hi, welcome to our next segment in our discussion of Art Nouveau, Fauvism, and Expressionism. In this video, we're going to be looking at the movement of Expressionism. This was a movement inspired by the Fauve movement in Paris, where a group of German artists in Dresden gathered around one artist named Kirchner, whose work we're going to be looking at later, and formed a group called Die Brücke, which means the bridge, in 1905, so named because they saw themselves as a bridge from traditional to modern painting. We're going to be looking at a transitional artist named Kathe Kollwitz, a female, and while she's sort of in between, she's not really an expressionist artist. Her subject matter is definitely more on the realist side of things in terms of depicting laborers and scenes of war and, the suffering of the lower class. But definitely her printmaking, and in particular her woodblock prints, have very graphic and expressionistic and emotional quality. So she is sort of associated with that movement. So we're going to be looking at her work first. So, in the political turmoil after the First World War, many artists turned to making prints instead of paintings. The ability to produce multiple copies of the same image made printmaking an ideal medium for spreading political statements. German artist Kathe Kollwitz worked almost exclusively in this medium and became very well known for her prints that celebrated the plight of the working class. So her subject matter is more of, in lines with the realist or realism movement, but I think when you look at her expressive line quality and, a little bit of the stylization of her figures, it definitely has an expressive and emotional quality as well. Since the 14th century, intaglio printing processes have allowed artists to innovate and experiment with different techniques through the flexible nature of the process. Numerous artists have experimented with different qualities in intaglio prints. We saw that with Rembrandt. But few have been truly innovative to create their own combination of techniques. And this is where Kathe Kollwitz excelled. And she's an example of a printmaker who constantly experimented with different printing techniques. She's up there with Mary Cassatt, who did aquatint as well. So, really looking to sort of push the medium of printmaking forward. And, she created images where her technical styles and experimentation are very innovative, but also convey symbolic meaning. And so what you're looking at is a print done called The Outbreak from the Peasants of War Series. So this is a series she did in 1903. And let me give you a little bit more information on it. Sorry, I had to look for my notes. So the series narrates the German peasant outbreak of 1525, led by Black Anna, where this was a leader, where they rebelled against the oppressive system of serfdom and feudalism. The outbreak was unsuccessful and the peasants were brutally repressed, but it marked a moment in history where the will for a better life and rebellion against an oppressive system ignited force. She created 7 images that make up the peasants' war, and it does narrate the abuses of the feudalism system on the peasants. The leader of the rebellion, Black Anna, taking initiative to rebel, the battle scene, and eventually the sad fates of the peasants. So this is an example, I think, of the leader, Black Anna, starting this rebellion. So again, it has lots of movement and energy, her body language, and again, these lines are just so lyrical, and, it really, I think, has a very emotional quality, especially when you combine this sort of expressive technique in terms of remark making with the subject matter of that's very political. So by her prints, in particular this series, she inspired hope and determination. She did side with the Peasant Rebellion by creating this series that documented their attempt for equality. Kollwitz was able to convey a peasant life in such a compelling way that through her use of printmaking techniques. And so we're going to look at some other techniques as well. She also experimented with woodblock. And so this is the official work that you should definitely know for the 250 works for the AP College Board. So the artist rarely depicted real people. She did in that series, Black Anna, but she definitely really tried to emphasize the movement of the peasants and the peasants themselves, as opposed to focusing her attention just on one person. The artist rarely depicted real people, though she frequently used her talents in support of causes she believed in. So here you have an artist who is really using her talent as an artist to, to explore and express ideas about politics and propaganda and social injustice. This work in memoriam Karl Liebknecht was created in 1920 in response to the assassination of the communist leader Karl Liebknecht during an uprising in 1919. The work is unique among her prints, and though it sort of is memorializing the man, it does so without advocating his ideology. So just to give you a little bit of history and politics, context behind this print. From the end of the First World War to the late 1918 to the founding of the Weimer Republic, this is the representative democracy that was the German government between the two world wars in August 1919, Germany went through a period of social and political upheaval. During this time, Germany was led by a coalition of left-wing forces with Marxist sympathies, the largest of which was the Social Democratic Party of Germany, and this is the initials are SPD. Other more radical groups were grappling for control of Germany at the same time, including the newly founded German Communist Party, KPD. The socialists and the communists both wanted to eliminate capitalism and establish communal control over the means of production. But while the socialists believed that the best way to achieve that goal was to work step by step from within the capitalist structure, the communists called for an immediate and total social revolution that would put government power in the hands of the workers. In this spirit, the KPD staged an uprising in Berlin in January 1919. Military units called in by the SPD. Sorry about that. Military units called in by the SPD suppressed the uprising and captured two of the leaders, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. Liebknecht and Luxemburg were murdered while in custody on January 15, 1919. Their death struck a chord across the left-wing landscape, and they were widely celebrated as martyrs to the communist cause. Kollwitz was not a communist, and even acknowledged that the SPD, generally more cautious and pacifist than the KPD, would have been better leaders, but she had heard Liebknecht speak and admired his charisma. So when the family asked her to create a work to memorialize him, she agreed. So when we look closely and start to study the composition more, we see that the print is really done in the style of a lamentation. As you remember, this is a traditional motif in Christian art depicting the followers of Christ mourning over his dead body, casting. And here she's put Liebknecht really essentially as the Christ figure. And so she's using iconography that would have been easily recognizable by the masses, who were the artist's intended audience. So just to remind you of what a lamentation scene was, here is Giotto, whose work we looked at. This is the beginning of early Renaissance or Proto-Renaissance, right before the Renaissance, and this is one that you should know, but here you see sort of that same sort of composition. Hers is definitely more horizontal, where she does have these sort of diagonals emphasized by the people, leaning toward the figure. But just to remind you of what a lamentation scene was. So when we look at the composition closer, it's divided. It divides it into 3 horizontal sections. The top section is densely packed with figures. So up here, their faces are well modeled and have interesting depth in themselves. But the sense of space is very compressed. The heads push to the foreground and are packed into every sort of available corner of space. It gives the impression of multitudes coming to pay their respects without compromising the individuality of the subjects. So it does seem overwhelming, all these people, but then we are able to look at their, individual expressions, their individual features, as well as their, their sort of different emotional expressions of grief. The middle strata contains comparatively fewer details, further emphasizing the crowding at the top of the printing plate. So here it becomes a little bit less, a little bit less detailed. This section draws attention to the specific action of the bending mourner. His hand on Liebknecht's chest connects this section to the bottommost level of the composition, the body of the martyred revolutionary. And so you definitely, and he really does create a diagonal similar to Giotto, and sort of the relationship of the figures. This also reminds me of Caravaggio, the sort of crescendo of grief, where the figures would sort of start off stagnant, and you would get these sort of different expressions where, the final figure would sort of let out this intense grief. Not quite here with these people, but definitely, I think, sort of looking to some of these older artists and masters for influence. I'm sorry, I keep saying he. I'm so used to like male artists. There's really not a lot of female art. I mean, we have looked at some female artists, but I wish a few more were included. We'll see more female artists represented when we look at contemporary global art. And so let's see. Let's look at some details. So again, earlier I talked about how this memorial focuses not on the man himself, but on the workers who have put their faith in him. And so I think that's one of the genius things she did about this, not, instead of memorializing him and sort of, taking his ideology as her own, she's really making it about the workers who were devoted to him and, keeps her integrity. The focus on those broadly affected would have been, the peasants and the laborers, and so it's very similar to her series that we looked at before, the peasants from the war cycle that I showed you in the first image. So in this detail, I wanted to show it to you because you get a sense of this printmaking technique. This is woodblock print, so the lines and the mark making is a little bit more graphic and more stylized than etching. But above we see, above the bending mourner, we see this woman's head and her baby up over, looking down on the martyred figure. And so this was also something that Kollwitz was interested in. Women and children were a central concern for her, and it's something that she did try to feature in her work. That these children and women, due to these uprisings and due to the sort of brutality of, certain government and economic systems in place, that, often women and children were left to bear the grunt. And were left starving, and behind. And so, you really do see her sort of incorporate this motif in a lot of her images, and you see that here. And it almost does look like a Mary, a Madonna and Child sort of iconography as well. So definitely Kollwitz had a unique voice in a creative environment that had been dominated by young men, and she was the first woman to be admitted into the Prussian Academy of Art. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on woodblocks. This is a woodblock done by Ernest Ludwig Kirchner, who we'll look at his work later, but he was the founder of the Bridge, the group of expressionists that I spoke about earlier. So woodblock printing is a technique in which a design is carved into a slab of wood, which is then covered with ink and printed onto paper. Ink coats the original surface of the woodblock, which prints as black, while the cutaway areas stay the color of the paper. This is different from printmaking methods such as engraving, in which the ink is caught in the recesses carved into the metal plate by the stylus, and therefore the lines print black, and the untouched areas of the plate come out white in the print. And so the German expressionist artists, in particular Kirchner, would really embrace the use of woodcuts and to sort of capture the rough, vital energy that they perceived in the work of so-called primitive societies without a fine art tradition. And so this is an example of that. And again, this is a woodblock print that Kollwitz has the technique that she's used in this print. So Kollwitz's career overlapped with the German expressionists, but she was not an expressionist herself, and was about a generation older than most of them. Her use of such a trendy technique was uncharacteristic, and in fact she only worked in woodblocks for a few years after the First World War. Kollwitz created some of her most powerful and affecting work in this style. We looked at her war print cycle earlier. She embraced the raw effect of woodblock printing to create pieces that cast off this sort of sophistication and sort of delicateness of etching and lithography. And Kollwitz felt that her protest against the horrors of war were best communicated in the rough edge and sort of the stark black and white that style or aesthetic that the woodblock print afforded. So in our next segment, I am going to stop here, and we'll be looking at more of the expressionist movement. So stay tuned.